Sorry, I didn't see you there. Welcome back to Tsars of Russia. As we all know, the Tsars of Russia were the supreme autocratic rulers of Russia from the time of 1613 to 1917. So now, tune in and enjoy the program Tsars of Russia.
Michael Romanov was the first Tsar of Russia. Michael put an end to the time of trouble. Michael was only 16 and very poorly educated when he took the throne in 1613. With the Treaty of Stambova in 1617 and the Truce of Dolina in 1618, he made peace with Sweden and Poland. Mikhail's father, Filaret, who was previously forced to become a monk, returned to Russia and co-ruled with his son. During Mikhail's father's lifetime, he controlled most of the government. His government consisted of a new structure that would fix financial problems in Russia. His rule also focused on contact with Western Europe.
Alexis was the son of the first Tsar, Michael Romanov. He took the throne following his father in 1645 at the ripe age of 16. After exiling his brother-in-law in 1648, he pledged his allegiance to the rebels by implementing a code of laws which declared serfdom as legal. This caused land assemblies to become of no use, and instead, focus was turned onto the military. One of the most memorable events that took place during Alexis's reign was his efforts towards the schism in the Russian Orthodox Church. He also encouraged trade with the West, breaking the isolation of Russia from its neighbors.
A very educated Fyodor took the throne in 1676. However, his education was never put into good use due to his young age and his lack of health. In order to take the lead in government affairs, his uncle stepped up and was followed by two courtiers. With their help, Polish customs, religious doctrines, and Latin books swept Russia. Vasily Golitsyn held the majority of power in his government and helped advance the military through reforms.
Ivan Alexeyevich had disabilities both physically and mentally and was diagnosed with scurvy, which would later partially paralyze him. With encouragement from his sister, Sophia, Ivan became the Tsar in 1862. Both Ivan and his brother, Peter I, ruled simultaneously. The majority of his time was spent devoted to prayer, fasting, and pilgrimage. He was allowed to remain a Tsar until his death in 1696.
Once Peter I became the sole leader of the dynasty, Peter the Great led the modern westernization of Russia and created a completely autocratic monarchy. He took control of the Russian Orthodox Church, strengthened serfdom, improved education, and built St. Petersburg. To advance his knowledge of culture and shipbuilding, he traveled to Europe. He built a strong military, especially his navy. He also sought war motorcorps and fought at the Great Northern War. All of his efforts expanded the borders of Russia, and eventually Peter the Great died before naming an heir.
With persuasion from many powerful individuals, Catherine I came into power in 1725. Once her husband, Peter the Great, died, due to her lasting impression on the Senate and high officials, she took the title of Empress. The Supreme Privy Council was put into place during Katharina's first year as Tsarina, in which it dealt with the majority of the government's affairs. The council undermined everything that Peter found most important in his ruling government. Finally, her turn at the throne came to an end when she died in 1727.
Peter II was appointed by Catherine I before her death and took the throne at age 11. He was one of the youngest Tsars up until this point. Due to his young age, the Supreme Privy Council appointed an advisor, Menshikov, to take the dominant role for the beginning of Peter's reign. Peter wasn't a fan of the caring gestures exemplified by this individual, so he turned to an aristocratic family for help. This family also turned their back on Menshikov by sending him to Siberia. While nearing Peter's death, St. Petersburg would no longer be the location of the capital. Instead, the capital would be relocated to Moscow.
Anna Ivanovna ruled over Russia for 10 years. She ruled with a limited monarchy because the state forced her to put most of her power in its hands, but she got rid of the Supreme Privy Council and then returned to autocracy. She wasn't big on her involvement in government and let her lover and advisors make most of the decisions for her. She sent her best advisors to take care of the War of the Polish Succession and Russo-Turkish War. These wars caused Russia to lose a lot of money and took a lot of lives. This caused for a lot of taxation of the peasants. Before she died, she called in Ivan to succeed her.
Ivan VI was only about 2 months old when he was named Tsar of Russia. He was declared the next in line for the throne one day, and the next day he was being crowned. His regent was the Duke of Courland, Ernest Johann Buron. Ernest Johann Buron was overthrown, and shortly later Ivan's mother became his regent. His mother, Anna Leopoldovna, was overthrown by a group led by Elizabeth. Ivan spent the next 20 years in solitary confinement.
Elizabeth I was the daughter of Peter the Great and Catherine I. Previous to her years as Tsar, she hadn't held a key role in government. However, After the threats from Ivan VI's mother, she seeked an ally from the French ambassador and Russian court. Finally, she rid Rome of the child ruler and his mother by arresting them and naming herself empress. She seemed to have followed in her father's footsteps, and the first step to this was reinstating the Senate. She differed from her father in the sense that government wasn't her main focus. Instead, she immersed herself in the court, church, and fashion. She was a strong patron of the arts and education, and happened to have founded some important institutions during her time. With her focuses elsewhere, the founders and leaders in charge of the government helped it take a turn for the worst. The economy worsened and peasants' lives were still moving in a negative direction. Elizabeth was a competent ruler, and with this, Russia was able to grow stronger in power along with the French and Austrians as allies.
Peter III was brought to Russia at a young age of 14 with his aunt Elizabeth. Shortly after, he married a German woman who took the name of Catherine. Peter succeeded Elizabeth at the throne when she died in 1762. His actions in his marriage resembled those he took as ruler. He had little care or interest for his wife and the people of Russia once he'd taken the throne. He was very focused on his relations with Prussia, and in the meantime, reversed the foreign policy set in place by Elizabeth. As a result, he withdrew from the 7 Years' War and eventually formed an alliance with Prussia. Every action he seemed to make caused a decline in the number of supporters. He even took steps to make requirements for guards much more severe, and tried to force religious practices upon the church. His wife, Catherine, felt threatened and would not let him have the satisfaction of divorcing her, so, in return, she commanded he be arrested and taken outside of St. Petersburg. This is when the reign of Catherine the Great began.
Catherine the Great. Well, she was the greatest Tsarina since Peter the Great. During her time of reign, she led the Enlightenment movement in Russia, created state-sponsored legislation, reorganized provincial government, and expanded serfdom. She also agreed with Austria and Prussia to partition Poland. As a result, she gained a warm water port on the Black Sea. She really wanted to free the serfs, so in return, she worked along with the nobles to keep control over them and accomplish their goals. She expanded Russian borders and won many wars against the Ottoman Empire. Catherine the Great started many new schools and changed the government.
Paul was the son of Peter III and Catherine the Great. Paul was not very close with his mother. He was very well educated. Paul focused on a strong military and strict policies. When in office, Paul repealed many of Catherine's policies. This gave people less freedoms and ability to speak their minds. Paul also repealed the order allowing monarchs to choose their own successor. Instead, he had the position fall to the next male Romanov. Paul was murdered by his advisors and guards in his bedroom after they were given permission to do so by his son, Alexander.
Catherine the Great, Alexander's grandmother, raised him so he would be prepared to rule. Until he was 16, he went to military training outside of St. Petersburg. He had an arranged marriage to Louise of Baden-Durlach, but he never loved her. Alexander I took the throne after the death of his father, Paul. To benefit the country, he formed a private committee with 4 of his closest friends. They set out to make good and beneficial laws. One of his most notable achievements was creating many different types of schools with different kinds of teachers and students. Although it was important, Alexander I never tried to abolish serfdom.
Alexander I did not have any children to pass down the throne to when he died, so his brother, Nicholas I, took over. Nicholas I did much to expand on Russia's borders. He firmly believed in the ways of autocracy. Also, he started the Crimean War. During the Crimean War, Russia suffered great losses. This is largely due to the fact that Russia didn't take advantage of the Industrial Revolution to improve their armies like the other nations did. Nicholas I limited power to the serfs and also made peasant conditions a little better. Nicholas I ruled for 30 years. It is not seen as one of Russia's best rulers. He died from pneumonia in 1855.
Alexander II came into power in 1855 when he freed the serfs of Russia from their enslavement. He was able to free the serfs by reducing the nobles' power in government. Under his rule, he sold Alaska to the United States. Because of his radical policies, many groups formed against him and attempted to kill him several times. He pushed the Industrial Revolution and tried for some very forward-thinking policies. A group of terrorists called the People's Will assassinated Alexander II in 1881. At the time of his assassination, he was attempting to set up a legislative body.
Alexander III was the son of Alexander II. He was nothing like his father in the sense that he was a harsh, rough, and blunt individual. He had great hatred towards the government. He finally took the throne in 1881 when his father was assassinated. Alexander waged a war against Napoleon in the fear that Napoleon was gaining too much power over Europe. He brought in trade and built many railroads. Many people of Russia wanted a democratic revolution and tried to kill Alexander III. He eventually was assassinated when he was blown up while stepping out of his car.
Nicholas II was the final Tsar of Russia. During his rule, Russia got in a few battles with Japan because they had similar ideas about imperialism. Russia was unsuccessful at this battle, which led the people to march for their voices to be heard. The marching Russians were shot. A constitution was created that gave very simple civil rights. His son and heir, Alexei, had hemophilia. This led Nicholas II to a monk named Rasputin to help heal his son. Nicholas and his entire family were led into a room and were assassinated by the Bolshevik. This marked the end to the Romanov dynasty.
Thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed our presentation on the Tsars of Russia.